Hey everyone, today for another vlog, and today I want to talk about expectation paralysis. So what is this? So I think it's a term I just made, like, but I think it's further explicit. It's when you have such unrealistic or high expectations that it just causes paralysis. It just becomes overwhelming to do whatever you want to do, right? Because you expect to do such an amazing job that it's just so overwhelming. What it's so yeah, it's just too much. Like there's too much to strive for, too much to do. It's too much pressure basically. So let's give some examples to exemplify what expectation paralysis is. So what I've experienced the most these days is with regards to drawing, right? So I think it's no surprise that artists have tend to have quite low self-esteem with regards to their work. I think the big reason why is because with art, it's very clear who is good and who isn't, right? Because we are very visual people, and so we can immediately like tell quality of art immediately. And because of this, like, there's a huge gap between your taste, what you enjoy, and your ability to draw. So this is called the taste gap, and this is incredibly prevalent in. This is incredibly big in art because as I just said, it's really easy to see who is good and who is not, and so as a result, people can evaluate themselves much more objectively than in other fields. Like for example, someone who is really ignorant about I don't know math, for example, or physics. Like if they don't know like the truly great theories and models, they might think that they're good just because they can do well at school, right? But then you learn of that they're much more intelligent mathematicians and physicists, and when you get to university you realize that you were just a small fish in a small pond, right? And you realize that there's a much bigger world out there. So I feel like with art it's very clear on the other hand when you are good or not. And so artists have this much uh this more this broader sense that my work is really bad compared to the work of the best. And I think this creates a lot of like really high expectations with regards to your work, right? And so what I've experienced is just being afraid to draw. Like I wouldn't admit it, but I think I was really afraid to draw. Like I would tell myself something like, which was not entirely untrue, but I would tell myself something like, "Oh, I'm feeling tired," or "Oh, I'm kind of burnt out," which are kind of true, but what I've experienced the last few days, like actually, the main problem has been really expectation paralysis. Is that I'm really putting way too much pressure on myself to get some results, and as a result, it becomes really unenjoyable to draw. Like even when I could get myself to draw, it was just really. It was so much pressure on myself to draw, and then like yesterday and today, I just decided to draw other subjects rather than the ones I always draw, right? Which is so I always tend to draw like portraits or whatever. And so I just started drawing animals, and I also switched materials, and that made a huge difference. And also had way less expectations because I don't usually draw animals. And it was so much more enjoyable. Like it was, day and night. Then and now I can definitely tell it had to do with very unrealistic expectations on art and what I wanted to do in the future. So yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And another thing I experienced with regards to expectation paralysis is writing. So I don't write. I guess kind of. I don't really write like for myself, but I'm talking about like writing for school and university. And so like my last year thesis, it was not a PhD. It was just like a master thesis. I don't know if it's a thing in other countries, but basically like at the end of your fifth year of uni, which is the last year for my system, it's a 5 year thing. It's not a 4 year program. At the end of the fifth year, you just write a work that sort of interests you, and it's similar to a PhD except you don't have to do something new, right? So it's just like a personal end of the program project. And yeah, the expectation paralysis was huge because like I had all these expectations on like sh- you know writing about what I had read and then putting all of it in a coherent fashion and having a text that flows really well. There was just too much. There was just too much that I wanted to do at the same time, and I was aware of that, and that was definitely when I learned of expectation paralysis, like properly, right? Like through my own experience, not just theoretically. And I had known about it theoretically of all these expectations, and my technique, which worked really well, was to simply write my ideas on the document, and then I would just, and I would do it after reading as well. I would just read and I would write notes, and I would just, improve iteratively my document over time rather than just try to do everything at once. And it was a very good idea. The thesis was still really hard to write because it had a lot of pages. It had far more pages than I imagined, which was the huge. I guess I don't know if it's a mistake is the right word, but it's kind of the huge problem I had in that work is that uh, I expected to do like you're expected to write like 40, 50 pages, and I expected to do something similar, write like 50 to 70. I ended up writing 145, so let's just say it was not properly estimated in terms of length. Uh, and the most frustrating thing was that it didn't even feel that great. Like it just felt like a lot of filler and a lot of writing, and not many interesting results, which was really frustrating. But yeah, that's how it went. So expectation paralysis can be summarized as having incredibly high expectations that you don't really make explicit. Right? The fact that they're unexplicit is usually why you tend to cling to them so hard, so much, and to the point where doing anything always falls short of those expectations. And in my experience, the way you resolve that is very simple. Like you just get rid of the expectations. You just draw, right? Like you just write, you just do the thing, and if it comes out uh like not as great as you would like, well, you just pick one or two things and you improve it. So that's basically been my technique: is you just do the thing and you improve iteratively. You just give up this idea of some kind of perfect plan or some kind of like amazing work that will just come out of your hand. Like it's just in my experience, that's not how it works. I just pick the iterative approach. It's so much more fun. It's so much less confusing. Like you just do the thing and you improve a few things at a time, and that's it. That's so much less overwhelming, and it actually works in my opinion, and my experience as well. Um, but it is worth asking ourselves, like why do we have such high expectations, like in general? And I guess, I guess obviously the immediate answer that comes to my mind is that we want to do good, we want to like create quality thing, and I think that's great, right? But I think a part of me is also like kind of desperate to do something good in my life. And I think that might be another reason why, having such high expectations, like what the source of those high expectations comes from. It's like wanting to be great sort of deal, right? So wanting people to notice me, wanting to be appreciated and all that. And I think, I think it's not like the most, I wouldn't say like it's 100% unhelpful, but I think it can be very, yeah, it can just add a lot of tension that isn't needed, right? This desperate chase for attention and all that, because it does, in my experience, it doesn't really help the process of creating and improving. Maybe for some people it does, but for me it doesn't really. For me, it's just really desperate, and yeah, it's just an interference, and then, yeah, again, just makes the whole process so much less enjoyable with all this crazy expectations of like, yeah. I've come to think that perfectionism is actually more often than not it's just a weakness. Like it's like I think there's some people who are perfectionists, but like they can actually make it work, such as some of the greatest artists of all time. I imagine that like Michelangelo or someone similar that would be a perfectionist because their attention to details and it's absolutely crazy. It's fucking mind blowing their attention to details, and I would say someone like that is probably a perfectionist, right? But I think for most people, perfectionism is just a weakness because it just makes them paralyzed. It just makes them afraid to do things and to explore. And yeah, it's not helpful, I would say, most of the time. And for me, it's definitely not helpful. I found I'm not really that kind of person who's just super anal about every detail. I'm more of a I draw because I want to enjoy myself type of thing, right? So that's kind of more of my mindset. And I think the next days in terms of drawing for me are just, I guess, the next weeks or month is going to be more about like just more quantity, like being less obsessive about quality and just more quantity, which is kind of weird, right? Like when people talk about quantity versus quality, they usually always say that quality is better. But actually, I'm going to say that quantity is actually better. As in, it's more fundamental. It's more fundamental to have quantity. At the end of the day, quality is what matters, and I would agree with that. But in my experience, you can only have quality with quantity, and so you have to start with just being, yeah, just being productive, or just being someone who just draws a lot or writes a lot, and that's how you get quality, in my opinion. Um, and yeah, that's kind of been my problem lately. I just don't really keep the wheel going, so to speak. So I don't really draw as much as I could, or as much as I don't really like the word should, right? But yeah, I just could draw a lot more, and I think my focus now is just going to be on uh, more variety and more fun techniques. So drawing in a way that is very like low pressure and like very free flowing type of deal, right? So it's gonna be my focus on the following things, and I think there are many areas where expectation paralysis, like it's a form of friction, right? Like if you're familiar with the idea of friction in productivity, then expectations are a form of friction, and I think there are many other areas. I think basically everything where it could be like sports, it could be like music, it could be relationships, it could be conversations. I've also heard of like sexuality, and like one of the advice given for people for couples who really like start not enjoying sex, and the advice was simply to like start touching one another, like not with any expectations of like making love or whatever, just touching one another, just being with one another, and just exploring. And I think that's really the general advice, right? Is to learn to just do without without trying to create anything, just doing, right? Just making lines, just writing words, just touching one another, just I don't know, just running, or just playing with the balls or whatever, right? Like not any expectation, just the just the act of doing it, to not get stuck. And definitely it took me quite a lot of time to get to that point where I realized how much that plays into my drawing process. Because I've been drawing for like 4.5 years now. And at first when I was new, I never had that, because obviously I was so excited to draw, and it's only quite a recent thing, right? So I think I'd say like when I was like at the 3 year mark, that's kind of when it started settling, like the expectations and all of that. And I think I also remember reading a book about, I think it was The Art of Learning, and the author he was a really good chess player when he was a kid, and he also talked about how as a kid he never had any like fears in terms of chess. He just enjoyed playing. But like as he became older and he was like a teenager and whatnot, he kind of started becoming a bit like afraid of chess in a way. Like he felt like his wins were not really celebrated, but on the other hand, when he lost, like people would, he felt like the world was kind of against him, right? Like he felt like walking on a tightrope where if he does it well, like, he just gets to survive, but if he falls, then he kind of falls off whatever. So basically, what he talked about was like this really intense pressure on performing, and I think that's yeah. The more I think about it, I think it's really really common, and I think being able to deal with it is it's so incredibly valuable. And so I think the bottom line is that the ability to play is really key to keep going, right? So I, people always talk about like plans and productivity and discipline and all that, but how many people talk about playing to keep yourself going? And I think this might actually be the single most important thing to being able to do something like long term, right? Because you know, I don't know, maybe discipline works for some people. I'm not really a disciplined type of guy. I have found it useful to use like in the short to medium term discipline. For me, medium term is like a few years. But in the long term, for me, it doesn't really work in my opinion. For me, like enjoyment is more important, and so for me, playing has been a much more successful thing, and definitely keeping my expectations in check, right? So I think I'm kind of starting to get rambly, so I'm gonna stop right here right now, and thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.